Introduction. Welcome. Today, we are going to discuss one of the most serious international conflicts currently taking place, the military confrontation between the United States, Israel, and Iran. In this narration, we will cover three main topics. First, what has happened so far. Second, why the conflict is so difficult to resolve. And third, what the consequences might be if it continues. Let's begin. Part 1. What has happened so far? As of March 2026, the United States and Israel launched a major joint military operation against Iran on February 28th of this year. In just the first 12 hours of the operation, approximately 900 airstrikes were carried out. The targets included Iran's ballistic missile systems, air defense infrastructure, military facilities, and key leadership figures. The United States officially named this operation Operation Epic Fury. On the very first day of the conflict, Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei was killed. His son, Mojtaba Khamenei, was subsequently selected as his successor. However, Iran did not simply accept defeat. The country launched a series of retaliatory attacks. By the time of this narration, Iran had fired over 70 waves of missiles and drones at targets including Israel, U.S. military bases in the Gulf region, and oil refineries in Kuwait. As a result, the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical shipping routes, has been effectively blockaded. This strait handles approximately 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas supply. Because of this disruption, global crude oil prices have surged by 45%, exceeding $110 per barrel. Part 2. Why is the conflict so difficult to end? Now let's examine why this conflict is so difficult to resolve. To understand the current situation, it helps to compare it with an earlier confrontation. In June 2025, about 9 months before this narration, there was a shorter conflict known as the 12-Day War. During that conflict, the U.S. and Israel focused their strikes on nuclear facilities and military installations. Because the objectives were limited and specific, diplomatic negotiations were possible, and a ceasefire was eventually brokered through the mediation of Oman. However, the current conflict is fundamentally different. From the very beginning, the U.S. and Israel chose to target Iran's top leadership, a strategy sometimes called decapitation. This decision eliminated the diplomatic channels that might have existed. As a result, both sides are now engaged in what analysts describe as a war of attrition, a prolonged conflict with no clear exit strategy. A Bahraini diplomat and mediator has publicly stated that the United States appears to have lost control of its own foreign policy, suggesting that Israel drew the Trump administration into the conflict. Furthermore, Iran has significantly expanded its attacks. Rather than limiting its response to Israel, Iran has struck targets in 9 or more countries, making a negotiated settlement increasingly difficult to achieve. President Trump has made contradictory statements. On one hand, saying he is considering scaling back military operations, while on the other, threatening to attack Iranian power plants if the Strait of Hormuz is not reopened within 48 hours. In short, neither side has clearly defined what victory means. Without a shared understanding of acceptable conditions, the conflict is likely to continue. Part 3. What are the possible outcomes? Let us now consider what might happen if this conflict continues for an extended period. There are 3 main scenarios. Scenario 1, prolonged war of attrition. This is currently considered the most likely outcome. The conflict continues at a significant level of intensity. Neither side achieves a decisive victory, and the world economy continues to suffer. According to the International Energy Agency, This conflict represents the most serious energy security crisis in recorded history. The disruption extends beyond oil and gas. It is also affecting supplies of fertilizer and semiconductors. Historical precedent is troubling. Every major oil price shock in recent history in 1973, 1978, and 2008 was followed by a global economic recession. Economists warn that the current situation carries a similar risk. In addition, developing nations that carry significant debt are particularly vulnerable. Rising interest rates combined with energy price increases could trigger a series of debt crises in countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. On the energy side, if Qatar's liquefied natural gas facilities remain disrupted, global LNG supply in 2026 could effectively fall back to 2021 levels, erasing 5 years of progress in clean energy transition. Scenario 2, escalation into a broader regional war. This is considered a moderate possibility. Iran's strategy appears to be widening the conflict across the region in order to increase the political and economic costs for the United States, and Israel thereby creating pressure for a ceasefire. There are real risks of ground operations in Lebanon, a resurgence of Houthi activity in Yemen, and the transformation of Iraq into a major battlefield. Perhaps most seriously, a prolonged regional war significantly increases the risk of nuclear proliferation. Several countries in the region may reevaluate their own nuclear ambitions if they believe the current international security framework is breaking down. Scenario 3. The collapse of the Iranian government. This might initially appear to be a favorable outcome for the United States and Israel. However, most security analysts consider it potentially the most dangerous scenario of all. If the Iranian government collapses, a power vacuum would likely form. This could lead to a civil war or the fragmentation of the country. Most critically, the management of Iran's nuclear facilities could become unstable or entirely uncontrolled, a risk that poses serious consequences for global security. Furthermore, millions of refugees would be displaced, creating a humanitarian crisis with regional and global implications. All three scenarios share certain common consequences. The international order established after World War II, built around American leadership, would be significantly weakened. China and Russia would likely benefit from the relative decline of U.S. influence. The credibility and reliability of American alliances and commitments would be called into question by partner nations around the world. Part 4. How does this affect Japan? For Japanese listeners, this conflict is not a distant event. It has immediate and serious implications for Japan. Japan depends on the Middle East for the majority of its oil and liquefied natural gas imports. With the Strait of Hormuz blocked, Japan's energy supply chain is under severe pressure. The disruption is contributing to a weaker yen and accelerating domestic inflation. Households and businesses across Japan are feeling the impact. Air travel is also being affected. Major flight routes connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa have been significantly rerouted to avoid the conflict zone. These longer routes mean higher fuel costs, longer travel times, and increased ticket prices. According to aviation industry reports, jet fuel prices have more than doubled, forcing many airlines to cancel routes or raise fares substantially. Japan's situation highlights a broader vulnerability. Advanced economies that depend heavily on imported energy are acutely exposed to geopolitical instability in the Middle East. Conclusion. Let us briefly summarize what we have covered in this narration. The United States and Israel launched a major military operation against Iran in late February 2026. The conflict has already caused significant disruption to global energy markets, international trade, and regional security. The conflict is difficult to resolve for several reasons. The elimination of Iran's top leadership removed potential diplomatic channels. Neither side has clearly defined acceptable conditions for ending the war, and the fighting has spread across multiple countries. If the conflict continues, the most likely consequences include a global economic recession, escalating regional instability, and a significant shift in the balance of international power. For Japan and other energy-importing nations, the urgency of diversifying energy sources and strengthening economic resilience has never been greater. The situation continues to develop. Staying informed about international affairs and understanding the economic and political forces that shape them is more important than ever. Thank you for listening.